Welcome back to Han Talks First. I'm Han. This is the podcast you're looking for. Today, we're talking about Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3. We're doing it live. We're doing it live because why the hell not? And thanks for joining us. And if you're joining us on the audio platforms, thank you as well. You don't have to be here live. Doesn't matter. And it was an interesting episode. It's a little different. It kind of broke the mold from the last two, introduced a brand new story. But we're going to break down every part of it. I'm going to give you some more theories and give a really detailed analysis of this episode. So let's dive into it.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Episode 3, The Convert. Right away, that should tell you a little bit about what this episode is going to be, because a convert, is a change in form, substance, or character. And in this case, it could be applied to two different characters in this show. One, Bo-Katan. As my title of this episode suggests, she now walks the way. She is part of the Watch. Is that what they call themselves? Or do they call themselves something else? Children of the Watch? I don't know. But she's now a part of that. Obviously, this is a major spoiler-filled episode, so if you have not seen it, you might want to dip out and come back later. And then the other person that the title of the episode could be applied to is Dr. Pershing. We obviously got him reintroduced to the show, and he is now in a rehabilitation center of old Empirees transitioning to the New Republic. Ease, whatever you call that. But we'll dive into it as we get to that segment of the plot. So this episode was directed by Lee Isaac Chung. I thought they did a good job. Not as good as last week's episode. Last week's episode was my favorite of the season so far. And if I remember, her name was Rebecca, who was the director. Forget the last name, but Rebecca. She did great. She's a cinematographer, so the shots looked a little bit different, had a little something extra to it, into the storytelling. It was a little repetitive last week, but if you were curious about my thoughts on last week's episode, down below in the description is the link to episode 2's review. So let's recap a little bit of what happens in the story. So Din, Mando, has taken a bath. He took a bath recently so he could rejoin his guild. Or not the guild, but his sect of Mandalorians to redeem himself in the living waters of Mandalore. It was a silly bath he took because he just sank to the bottom. And if Bo-Katan wasn't there, he would have been dead. But what was interesting about him returning to his group of Mandalorians was the fact that Bo not only went with him, but her castle burned down. She needed a place to go, so that's understandable. But she now walks the way of those Mandalorians, which we'll get into a little bit later. So this episode kicks off with a TIE Scepter aerial dogfight. And it was a great action scene. I loved it. It was cool to see space battles again in Star Wars. It's kind of weird to say, but we rarely get Star Wars in Star Wars. Isn't that weird? But anyway, it was a great fight. They're, of course, ambushed on the way back to the castle. Din does some great maneuvers where he's jumping out of Bo's ship and landing on theirs and landing on the pad, getting his, whatever you call it, his, what is the name of his ship? I can't remember. But anyway, they tear some of them down, and then they realize they were actually going for Bo-Katan's castle, and it, of course, became annihilated. And Bo was not too thrilled about that. And all of this is kind of setting up, I believe, more Moff Gideon. And this episode really emphasizes that Moff Gideon is still a major threat. And we'll talk about that once we get to the Coruscant place. But it was a great scene, when Bo is just like, I grew up flying these ships, and little R4 is nervous and all that kind of stuff. She's a great pilot. Some of the maneuvering she did, some of the ways she was able to attack the TIE Scepters was really great. And more we see Bo-Katan is just a badass. She's a true badass. And I didn't realize that she would have such a major role in this season. I'm thrilled about it because I love Katie Sackhoff. But she's gone from being a supporting character to now almost a lead. She has pretty much as much screen time as Din Djarin has had, which is fantastic. So after their little battle, we finally go back to Coruscant. It was great seeing Coruscant again. It always is. I love that planet. And we get reintroduced to Dr. Pershing, or Dr. Glasses, as I like to refer to him as. And being back in the Senate room, this little hearing room that they had where he was giving his opening monologue for Redemption, feels like the prequels, baby. It does. Feels just like it. And it's really cool to see again. And then the next little character introduction following Dr. Pershing was that of G68. The second I saw Elia Kane come back on screen, I immediately knew she's working for Gideon. Just the way she approached that room and sat down and eyeballed Dr. Pershing, you could see she had ulterior motives. And she's not there for her rehabilitation. She has something more sinister in mind. But then it goes back to more shots of the landscape of Coruscant, and it just really feeds you into that prequel era, and it feels great. And it was really, really cool to see again. Now, it wasn't confirmed that Elia Kane is working for Moff Gideon, but like I said, the second I saw her, I kind of knew. I kind of figured, she was really close to him and his little regime. And some of the things she does in this episode leads me to believe that she's there. But before we get into that, let's talk about this rehabilitation program, this amnesty program, as they like to call it, which is pretty much saying that, they didn't just get off scot-free, all of the employees of the Empire. They were actually tried and convicted. That's the first scene we saw of Dr. Pershing, kind of giving his closing arguments onto why he can be a better or a rehabbed person. So that's interesting to find out too, is that, they're not just converting everybody. They're actually giving them a fair trial, which is pretty cool. I mean, New Republic, that's how we wanted them to bring back everything and revive the galaxy again. So we get to see that. It was kind of nerve-wracking, I assume, for people in this world to think, well, if the Empire goes away, are we just going to become the Empire again? I don't know if what I'm saying is making any sense, but there it is. And I don't know what these little lollipop ice cream cones they were eating, the photon fizzles, but man, that looked really good, and I was dying to have one in this scene. Also in this scene, there was a mention of the highest mountain point of Coruscant and how it was the rock sticking up from the ground. And I was listening to this podcast talk about that moment and how that was really cool, and it expanded the lore and it brought in something new to Star Wars lore. But that's actually existed already. You can see it in Lego Star Wars in the game. If you go up to the second level of Coruscant on the far right side, you can actually see the rock sticking up from the ground. And I thought that was pretty cool too. And now it's not the first time it's ever appeared, but it was cool to see that Lego Star Wars gets it right, and that was pretty cool. The other thing about this amnesty program, this rehab center for the Empire, is it reminded me a lot of that movie called Oblivion with Tom Cruise, where clones were overrun by a robotic army, and to make sure that humans were conditioned appropriately, they would of course track their habits. But the key line that was repeated throughout the film was, "Are you an effective team?" And that's what this reminded me of. It actually reminded me of that movie Oblivion. What's great about that film is it's kind of a reverse treatment of humans to robots in our world, how we control the robots. But in this world, it was robots controlling the humans, treating them like they were robots, which is a fascinating concept. Also, in the scene where Dr. Pershing and Elia are talking, you can actually hear in the background the March of Resistance, the theme music written by John Williams, which was really cool to see. It just shows you that we're building back into that sequel era of those movies. And it was like a light motif. It was just a bum bum ba da dum ba ba da da, but it was cool to hear. Again, the music in this season, I think, is significantly better than the previous two. And someone had pointed out to me actually that it's not Ludwig van Göransson writing the music this time around. And I thought that was interesting. And I can't remember the name of the musician, the composer, but they're doing a fantastic job. The ending of season 2 had some of the best music I'd heard in Star Wars, especially the finale episode, introducing new electronic forms of classicism music, but then also giving a really grand chamber piece during the Luke Skywalker moments. As far as tonally matching what's on screen, the syncopation there, the music in season 3 is really outstanding. It's definitely better than Andor in my opinion, but it's getting better, which I like to see. It makes me enjoy the product so much more. The other thing I kept thinking about in this episode was, the aesthetics of this Amnesty Center and the New Republic. It's really beautiful. It's simple, minimalistic, but it's beautiful to look at. And all I could think of was, what if that infamous train wreck of a Star Wars hotel in Disney looked like it was on Coruscant? What if it looked like what it looks like in The Mandalorian at this Amnesty Center? That would be really cool. I would actually be interested in going. The problem with the Star Wars hotel is it looks nothing like anything I've ever seen in Star Wars. It just makes no sense. They should have themed it around Mandalorian, honestly. I think that would appeal to a lot more people. Then you can have Mando walk around with Grogu. But yeah, there's that. So the New Republic. I had mentioned that it seems like they're trying to stray away from the Empire's traditions, how they treat people, how they form military and government and socio and political society. But there are a few exceptions that I think they are actually following the same route that the Empire did. And one of those things was the example of the mind flare that they use on Dr. Pershing. So if you remember, Pershing was scared of it. He's like, you're erasing my memory, blah, blah, blah. That's what the Empire used to do. And the doctors working on him are basically saying, oh, no, we bring it a lower energy level now. So, we don't do that. We're not like them. It's almost like they're trying to excuse themselves for being exactly like what the Empire was like. They're using the same technology. They're using the same traditions. Yes, they have a rehab center, but it's almost like it's a cover. It's a cover by calling it an amnesty program, when in actuality, it's just conditioning. They're conditioning them to, instead of say the Empire, all hail the Empire, all hail New Republic. So it's an interesting concept there too. Now I will say some of the stuff with Dr. Pershing and Elia, it was a brand new story to this season. It didn't feel out of place, but it felt like right on the border of being kind of taking me out of the show. If this episode had only focused on those two characters and the whole setting of Coruscant, I wouldn't have liked this episode. Luckily, they began and ended with Mando and Bo-Katan. I think it could have used a little bit more intercutting between those two plots, because it did feel like this dragged on for a little longer than it should have. And I felt that way a little bit with season 2 in the cave, or excuse me, episode 2 in the cave scenes. But that's just me. So another way that I think they could improve this is if they would have started Dr. Pershing's story in episode 1. Give us all the characters so we feel like we're going through all the journeys at the same time. Because one of the issues I'm having with the show is I'm struggling to figure out what the purpose is narratively going forward. Like, what's the end goal for the series? Yes, it's supposed to be serialized, episodic, but there's a part of me that still is like, okay, season 1 and season 2 were all predicated on getting Grogu back to his kind, aka the Jedi. Season 2 ended and he got to go with Luke Skywalker. it really felt like a series finale, season 2, didn't it? At least it did for me anyway. And now we got a new objective in season 3, which was now you have to get redeemed, go to Mandalore, bathe in the living waters, and then rejoin your clan. And he did that almost immediately. So it makes me wonder, well, where are we going now? What is the end goal? Because nothing has been addressed. A lot of new storylines have been introduced. Pershing, Mythosaur, Bo-Katan walks the way, all these things, but I have no idea what's going to happen. Obviously, we can speculate, we can theorize that, well, one of them is going to reclaim Mandalore now that they know it is a livable planet again, and one of them is going to wield the Darksaber, one of them is going to ride the Mythosaur, maybe both of them will. Who's going to rule? Is it Din? Is it Moff Gideon? Is it Bo-Katan? But all of that is just speculation. It's speculative. We don't actually know that that's the direction the show is going, you know? So I'm a little I'm not disliking it, but I just kind of want to know what the purpose of watching it is. And I'm not saying it's bad. I'm really not. You know, I said once when Obi-Wan Kenobi was on air, I was on a panel, a Star Wars panel, and I mentioned that after like episode 3, I was like, this show's terrible. This show is awful. There's no direction. There's no purpose. It's totally breaking continuity with the rest of the Star Wars stories out there. And it was just bad. And one of the persons on the panel just said, you know, I think this really teaches us about patience and that you can't judge something based on only a small handful sample size. And patience will really make you see later on that you're wrong and that it actually is a good show, but you don't have the full story to take. No, fuck that. No. A series, a television should not have to rely the audience on watching everything to, one, understand it, or two, to judge if it's good or not. Sometimes you have good and bad episodes. And sometimes if you have multiple bad episodes, people check out. I'm not going to check out. Again, I said this is bad. I'm kind of going on a soapbox here because I'm still bitter about that situation. It's like, no, a bad story is a bad story. It doesn't matter what other context you have to throw at it. Anyway, let's get back to the convert, which, again, another theory could be it is Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan now walks the way of the Watch. She is one with Din. Again, did not see this coming. I think she could definitely be using this to her advantage to try and get what she wants, whether that is using this clan of the Mandalorians, these zealots, to help her reclaim Mandalore, or to have an army to go after the Mythosaur or the Darksaber. I think she's going to betray them eventually. Right now, she's earned their trust. And of course, Vizsla is not happy about the situation. He seems to be the only one who is very insecure about, one, Din Djarin coming back, but two, that there's a new member to their clan. And I think this could make this, it's setting up. These whole 3 episodes have been set up. But again, where is it going? You know? And I don't think it's a writing issue. I don't think it's a directing issue. I think it's just that they approach the series episode by episode, and they don't actually have a projected prospect of what they want to accomplish as an end game. And Jon Favreau even said as much. He said it at the premiere or at an interview pre-premiere. He actually said he doesn't have an end game in mind, but he's written season 4 already, and he's beginning to write season 5. So there's that. Now, I will say, every time we get into Din Djarin's clan and they start talking about the way they approach being a Mandalorian and, you know, bathing in the living waters, all the religious stuff, I'll be honest with you, it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. Because it's very culty. And it's really hard for me to like Din Djarin when he's so dead set on being a member of a cult, you know? And that's what it is. You can't say it any other way. They're a cult. They're very culty. So I wanted to do this live because I wanted it to be a shorter episode. I wanted to get this out earlier in the week, but I just haven't had a lot of time. So this was the only time I can do it. Anyway, to kind of recap, I think Bo-Katan is taking the situation advantage here, and she's going to betray everybody because she has a very selfish motive here for getting her people back to follow her and to regain control of Mandalore as her family once did. I think she's going to hurt a lot of people in the process. But it's interesting. I didn't see it coming to where she would actually join the Zealots, and she would not take off her helmet, and she also bathed in the water. That was an interesting narrative of storytelling, I think. That made it very interesting to me. Again, I think the Dr. Pershing stuff was a little bit too long. I could have dealt without it being so long. If it was introduced earlier on in the series, that would have been fine. But again, I just need to have a better understanding of how everything's going to connect. And we could dive in more later about the whole cloning ideas he has and how that's going to relate to Kane, and how Kane is, we didn't really talk about it, but when she used him to get those materials from that ship, she's obviously getting it for Moff Gideon. I know I saw a lot of people saying it's for Thrawn, but I really don't think they're going to introduce Thrawn in The Mandalorian. I really think they're saving that for Ahsoka because Thrawn has nothing to do with the Mandalorian storyline, at least so far. Who is it? Gideon could be working for Thrawn, but I don't think that's actually what's happening. I think they're two separate paths, but we'll have to wait and see. I'd love to talk more about it. Thank you guys for watching so much, and thanks for listening on the audio platforms. I appreciate it too. I just saw a comment here in the chat. I wanted to check it out. It says, I think I like the fact that we don't know where it's leading. I enjoy the randomness, and I'm not really knowing where we are headed yet. Yeah, so again, I'm not saying it's bad. I just wish that for myself that I knew where it was going. Because I think it all stems from me. I'm not a TV fan. I don't watch a lot of television or series. It's never been what I enjoy. I'm more of a movie guy, which is why I'm also really fiending for a Star Wars movie to come back. And we had some updates actually about Star Wars films. You can watch my other episodes linked down in the description about the films. And this April 20th, I think, or April, I forget the date, Star Wars Celebration, they confirmed they're going to give us Star Wars movie news, probably by Damon Lindelof, but we'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. My Star Warriors, my nerfs, my nerds of all shapes and sizes, thanks for joining us today and listening to the Han Talks First podcast. We'll be back next week, probably on Thursday, to talk about episode 4. Are you still excited? Still liking the show? Bo-Katan's my favorite. She's fucking badass. I love her. She's amazing. Bo-Katan is life. Bo-Katan is love. Until next time, my friends. Somehow, some way, somewhere this week, may the Force be with you.
So who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.